Albert Einstein once said, "The secret to creativity is knowing how to hide your sources." But designer Naoto Oshima made it no secret that his Speedy character was a mashup of Felix the Cat and Mickey Mouse. Combining these iconic characters gave Sonic instant appeal. However, thanks to a number of more unique sources of inspiration, the game turned out to feel fresh at the same time. In this episode, we dive into the minds of the original Sonic team and discover their way of working and inspirations. Sonic's first outing is still the most influential for the series, especially in terms of art direction. In a way, our creative mind works like a sponge. We constantly soak up inspiration from whatever we're exposed to. So to understand the roots of the game's art style, we have to travel back a few years before production started, the 80s. A more radical time when kids wearing LA gears and Walkmans roam the earth. 3D computer-generated imagery and animation were starting to take off in this decade. It was still a highly new and experimental art form, but big leaps were made in terms of technological advancements and tools. The advertising industry in particular embraced this technology early on in order to create impactful TV ads. The general work was still somewhat crude, often featuring simplistic geometry with harsh lighting and an overall plastic look. But in a way, this gave the work an abstract quality that fit perfectly with the overall vibrant vibe and aesthetic of the 80s. The CGI art trend hadn't gone unnoticed by Sonic's designer Naoto Oshima. He and his art team managed to replicate it with the stylish 2D pixel art. His goal was to give the game a more sophisticated look. Although Sonic's development started with the turn of the decennium, 3D graphics were still pretty much a novelty at that point, so the art style managed to fit perfectly with Sonic's near-future world. The 3D polygon look made their way in various elements, the most obvious examples being the palm trees and birds and fish in the background of Special Zone. Various other elements featuring simple, colorful, geometric shapes were also rooted in early CGI. As for the checkered patterns, they were everywhere in the 80s and also popped up in computer graphics frequently. They proved to be a successful way of conveying depth, which was already demonstrated by Yu Suzuki in Space Harrier. Another source of inspiration for Green Hill Zone in particular was the work of illustrator Aizen Suzuki. His work features vibrant blues and reds that really pop and lend a sense of vitality to the level. Suzuki was, in his turn, inspired by the holiday lifestyle and living the good life. 80s pop art was also rippling through in the Japanese box art with its colorful patterns. The artwork was done by one of Sega's in-house art directors, Akira Watanabe. It was still the trend to paint by hand instead of using computer software. Acrylic-based paint was used in this instance, which dries relatively quickly and is therefore ideal for sharp illustrations. Sonic's portrayal still had some cuteness to it. However, this was toned down in future installments when Tails filled that role. Although Sonic was inspired by these 80s art trends, it still managed to pass the test of time. The checkered patterns, vibrant colors, and polygonal palm trees are instantly recognizable as Green Hill Zone. They all work very well inside the context of the game, and yet give it a unique look. The Mega Drive was already 3 years on the market when Sonic launched. The developers were well aware of the console's strengths and started to tap into the maximum potential. They utilized all the tricks and tweaks to get the most out of the system. As a result, Sonic introduced a richness and depth that was rarely seen on a console before. It was essentially the next step forward in 16-bit gaming. If we break down Green Hill Zone, we can differentiate at least 5 layers. The Mega Drive's video chip only supported 2 background layers and a foreground layer for sprites. So how are they able to bring so much depth to the game? For starters, they utilized the priority render system of the console. Some elements in the background layer were given a high priority flag, and as a result were rendered on top of all the other layers. Another trick to simulate more depth was line scroll. This technique allowed scrolling lines of pixels at different speeds, and so creating the illusion of depth. To breathe some life into the zone, the more commonly used trick of palette rotating was used. However, it was executed exceedingly well in Sonic. The patterns were more complex, simulating a gentle flow in the water. The dither effect in the waterfalls is also noteworthy, even impressing the art director of Streets of Rage 2, Ayano Koshiro. It may not seem like anything special, but when viewed on an old CRT television, the pixels blend nicely together, creating the illusion of transparency. Every effort was put into Green Hill Zone to make it the perfect introduction and demonstration for the game. It went through numerous iterations and was tweaked and perfected throughout the whole development process. However, that doesn't mean that all other zones were neglected. Labyrinth Zone, for example, also boasts a number of impressive effects. It's commonly known that the Mega Drive has a somewhat limited color palette. To To extend the number of on-screen colors, mid-frame palette swaps were used. While the image is rendered to the TV from top to bottom, the program could override the palette and so double the number of on-screen colors. This helped to realize the underwater effect. As for the wave effect in the background, that was another line scroll effect. It's important to add that these effects didn't require a lot of CPU power or data transfers, and therefore hardly impacted the overall speed of the game. Another mastery of programming are the uneven terrains, which may not sound special, but they were a key ingredient to make Sonic work. Had the game been composed of mainly flat surfaces like most other platformers, it simply wouldn't be as dynamic. Luckily, Yuji Naka already had some experience tackling this challenge on his previous project, porting Ghouls and Ghosts to the Mega Drive. But it still required a great deal of clever programming to keep Sonic at the right angle and prevent him from running through floors and walls, especially at high speeds. Yuji Naka became known by his colleagues at Sega as someone who could work miracles. He was somehow always able to make a concept work on the 16-bit hardware, whether it was rotating the entire screen 360 degrees or letting the game run at a constant frame rate at blazing speeds. All these impressive effects aside, to make the gameplay work at these high speeds, a simple yet effective control scheme became a necessity. Before the team settled on Sonic as the main protagonist, a rabbit-like character was considered. His long ears could be used to pick up objects and throw them at enemies. However, they struggled to make this gameplay mechanic work as it broke the flow of the game. The development team decided to drop the character, which led to the creation of the world's most famous hedgehog. It can feel so satisfying to make Sonic zip through levels at high speed, but you subconsciously know that there's danger lurking ahead, which you might not be able to avoid in time. In a sense, it's like the thrill of driving a sports car at high speeds, but in a more safe virtual environment. And this is exactly what Yuji Naka tried to achieve with his speedy engine, giving the player a glimpse of the thrill. But Sonic isn't only about high-speed gameplay. It's just one of the mechanics to stimulate our senses and evoke emotion in the player. On the topic of gameplay and emotions, designers of pinball tables also acknowledge the importance of stimulating our senses.
Pinball is about a sort of satisfying feeling when you're playing the game, when you're flipping it up.
People would say, this shot feels bad. Well, now think about this. You're standing in front of a wooden box. Your connection to this wooden box are your hands touching buttons. Where's the feel come in? It's a combination of visual and audio things that in turn make the player feel that that shot is a good shot.
Wonderful.
Pinball was likely a big inspiration for Sonic's gameplay, as some of the underlying gameplay principles can be traced back to this high-speed arcade game. Much like Pinball, Sonic is less about mastering a constant set pattern of obstacles, but instead quickly anticipating in the moment. Sonic's speed, uneven terrain, and multi-tiered levels brought a certain dose of randomness and freshness to each play session. In Sonic, the terrain is an important part of your playground. It can be a psychological enemy when you're abruptly halted by an obstacle that breaks your flow. But keeping Sonic's momentum, avoiding obstacles, and taking advantage of ramps and hills can feel so satisfying. This ultimately adds in an extra dimension to the gameplay, in which you're not only focused on enemies, but also interacting successfully with the terrain itself. Hirokazu Yasuhara played a pivotal role in steering the team in the right direction as a team lead and level designer. His general way of working was to sketch out engaging and interesting gameplay situations that could be incorporated into the levels. Sonic is literally filled with these little moments that evoke emotions in the player. Understanding the human psyche and playing with concepts like fear and reward are the foundation of game design. During his career as a game designer, Yasuhara became intrigued by the publications of 20th century sociologists Johann Huizinga and Roger Caillois in particular were key figures who analyzed the fundamental characteristics of play and its importance in our society long before the birth of video games. They recognized 4 different forms of play. During his career as a game designer, Yasuhara became more consciously aware of what these forms of play could add to an engaging experience. However, there is no perfect formula for game design. Our tolerance levels and how various situations make us feel and how we act on them varies from person to person. Take Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone, for example, the 2 slower-paced areas of the game. The platforming skills, test of patience, and fear of drowning may result in stress and frustration in some players, while others might crave a challenge or even feel at ease in the tranquil underwater ruins. Of course, music, visuals, and the memories they evoke also greatly influence how we perceive a level. Although Marble and Labyrinth seem to be the most criticized zones, there's no denying that they brought a certain dose of depth, variety, and a unique rhythm to the game. To make the whole experience complete, the game needed a score worthy of the project's ambition. and Dreams Come True bassist Masato Nakamura, Sega found the perfect man for the job. He handled the project like film score, and took inspiration from the concept art for the game, as it was still in early development. He was briefed to write catchy tunes that compelled players to hum along. Nakamura was not experienced in writing game music or playing games for that matter. He would record his compositions on tape and send them over to Sega. A sound engineer would listen to the music and try his best to recreate it on the Mega Drive hardware. In the following fragment, you can hear Nakamura's original MIDI recording. In contrast to most other freelance composers, Nakamura was not paid a flat fee, but still owns at least part of the rights to the music. As a result, the original Sonic theme was sometimes recomposed in future releases, as Sega was not always willing to pay the extra bill. Sonic's development cycle spanned 14 months, which is almost double the time of a typical game of its era, but it certainly shines through on screen. All of Sonic's art, music, and game code was packed in a 4 megabit cartridge, which was the norm for a 16-bit game at that point. 4 megabit translates to about half a megabyte, so in the end it's still a very limited amount of storage space, making the end result all the more impressive. A fun piece of trivia, the famous Sega yell was originally never planned. At the final stages of production, a segment in which Sonic was supposed to perform in a music band was dropped, leaving a bit of free memory on the cartridge. They decided to allocate it to a Sega audio sample used in their old Master System commercials. When it came to marketing the Blue Hedgehog, the creative minds at Sega of America played a pivotal role. When they first heard of the character without having seen the game in action, they were skeptical. In the sketches, Sonic was portrayed a little too edgy and aggressive. The newly appointed CEO, Tom Kalinske, knew that he had to become more approachable and likable in order to become a successful mascot. Under his wing, Madeline Schroeder went ahead to tweak the character's appearance, removing the distracting elements and write his backstory. Marketing genius Al Nilsson, who was renowned for his creative and bold plans, helped to set up a launch campaign. Part of the strategy was to keep the game a secret and build some mystery by leaking only a select number of screenshots and character artwork. Another bold move was to show the newly released Super Mario World and Sonic side by side on Sega's CES booth. All of this combined effort made Sonic an instant smash hit. To this day, it's still Sega's most important title in the history of the company. It propelled the console wars to new heights, and as a result, forcing Nintendo to up their game. To Sega's credit, their management placed the faith of this important title in the hands of a small team, instead of relying on market facts and figures. No marketing research would ever suggest a lightning-fast blue hedgehog with levels inspired by early CGI and pinball. But that's the real magic. If we're only limited by our imagination and free to draw from all sources that inspire us, the end result can be truly genuine and unique.
Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Take a look and you'll see into your imagination. We'll begin with a spin, traveling in the world of my creation. What we'll see will defy explanation. If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to do it. Want to change the world, there's nothing to it. There is no life I know to compare with pure imagination. Living there